Emily Brooks wandered aimlessly through the cold streets of New York. The biting wind cut through her thin coat, offering little protection against the harsh autumn weather. The city, once a beacon of dreams and endless possibilities, now felt like a prison with no escape. With each step, Emily felt the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down on her chest, as if the world around her was slowly collapsing. Just 6 months ago, Emily's life had been entirely different. She was a 19-year-old college student, balancing her studies with joyful moments spent with her mother, Grace. But that life shattered on one tragic night when a car accident took her mother away forever. In an instant, Emily lost not only the person she loved most, but also the stability and security she had always known. With no family to turn to, she quickly found herself homeless, struggling to survive on the unforgiving streets of New York. The first few days were the hardest. Emily still remembered the despair she felt when she realized she no longer had a place to call home. A park bench soon became her refuge, where she spent nights trying to stay warm and protect herself as best she could. The constant fear of being attacked, the hunger gnawing at her stomach, and the humiliation of being ignored by everyone around her became her new reality. Slowly, Emily learned to survive. She scavenged through trash bins for scraps of food and faced the shame of begging, receiving either looks of disdain or, worse, being completely overlooked. But despite the overwhelming challenges, she didn't give up. She kept the memory of her mother alive in her heart, using it as fuel to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. One afternoon, as she rummaged through a dumpster behind a restaurant, something unusual happened. Emily was so focused on finding something to eat that she didn't notice the well-dressed figure approaching her. William Harper, a wealthy businessman, had been watching the scene intently. There was something about this young woman that caught his attention, something he couldn't ignore. Her eyes held a deep sadness, but there was also an undeniable strength within them. He felt a wave of compassion and, on impulse, decided to approach her. "Excuse me, do you need help?" William asked, his tone gentle and sincere. Startled, Emily instinctively stepped back. She wasn't used to kindness, especially from someone like him. She looked at the man, trying to gauge his intentions, but exhaustion and hunger clouded her thoughts. I'm fine," she replied hesitantly, trying to keep her composure. William could see the discomfort in her expression, but he wasn't deterred. Something inside him urged him to do more than just offer empty words. "It doesn't look like you're fine. I know you don't know me, but I'd like to help. You can trust me." The offer was unexpected and almost unreal to Emily. Suspicious, she didn't know how to respond. But as she looked into William's eyes, something within her softened. Maybe it was the sincerity in his tone, or the look of someone who genuinely cared. Against all her instincts, Emily decided to hear him out. "If you'd like, I can offer you a safe place to stay. At my home," William continued, watching her reaction closely. The proposal seemed crazy, but Emily was exhausted from fighting alone. She knew accepting help from strangers was risky, but what choice did she have? Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes, accepting help is the bravest thing you can do. Making a decision that would alter the course of her life, Emily finally accepted William's offer. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope ignite in her heart. As the black town car glided silently through the bustling streets of New York, Emily sat in the back seat next to William Harper, still processing what had just happened. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, trying to make sense of this unexpected twist in her life. He seemed calm and collected, the epitome of a successful businessman, yet his kind demeanor was something she hadn't encountered in a long time. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions, but Emily's exhaustion kept her from asking any of them. For now, she simply let herself be carried away, both literally and figuratively, unsure of where this would lead. The car pulled up to a stop in front of an imposing iron gate, which slowly opened to reveal a sprawling estate. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the car drove down the long driveway, lined with perfectly manicured trees and gardens. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into a different world, one far removed from the harsh reality she had been living in. The mansion that stood before her was grand, with towering columns and wide marble steps leading up to an enormous front door. Everything about it screamed wealth and privilege, two things that had become foreign to her. William turned to her with a reassuring smile. "This is my home. I hope you'll be comfortable here." Emily nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. As they got out of the car, a butler appeared at the door, his face a mask of polite indifference. He opened the door for them, and they stepped inside. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior, with high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and polished floors that gleamed under the soft lighting. It was a far cry from the cold, dirty streets she had called home for the past few months. But as awe-inspiring as it was, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place, like an intruder in someone else's life. She stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to do next, until William gently guided her through the grand foyer. "Let's get you settled in," he said warmly, leading her up a sweeping staircase. "I've had a room prepared for you. It's quiet, and you'll have your own space. You can stay as long as you need." They reached the second floor, where he showed her to a room at the end of the hall. Emily stepped inside and was immediately struck by the understated elegance of the space. The room was large, with a plush bed, soft rugs, and a window that overlooked the lush gardens outside. A sense of relief washed over her as she realized she wouldn't have to spend another night on a cold bench. She could finally rest, even if just for a little while. "Thank you," Emily said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. William smiled, but before he could respond, a voice echoed from the hallway, sharp and cutting. "William, what is this about?" Emily turned to see a woman standing in the doorway, her posture rigid and her expression icy. She was tall and elegant, dressed in designer clothes that perfectly complemented her poised demeanor. Emily instinctively took a step back, feeling the woman's hostility radiate through the room. "Victoria," William greeted her, his tone calm. "This is Emily. She's going to be staying with us for a while." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she looked Emily up and down, her lips pressing into a thin line of disapproval. "And why exactly is that?" William's expression softened slightly, but there was a hint of firmness in his voice. "She's had a difficult time, and I offered her a place to stay. I hope you'll understand." Victoria didn't reply immediately. Instead, she continued to scrutinize Emily, her gaze cold and calculating. Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest, anxiety creeping in. It was clear that Victoria didn't approve, and Emily suddenly felt small and out of place, as if she were nothing more than a stray that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Finally, Victoria turned her attention back to William. "I see," she said coolly, her tone dripping with skepticism. "We'll discuss this later." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Emily exhaled a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She looked at William, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Don't worry about her," he said quietly. "You're safe here. Take some time to rest. We'll talk more later." Emily nodded, though she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling left by Victoria's reaction. As William left the room, closing the door behind him, Emily sank onto the edge of the bed. She was grateful for the chance to be somewhere safe, but the tension in the air had already made her question if she truly belonged here. For now, all she could do was hope that she had made the right choice by trusting William. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains of Emily's new room, waking her from a deep, dreamless sleep. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the plush bed and the quiet surroundings so far removed from the harsh realities she had grown accustomed to. But as her eyes adjusted to the light, the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was in the Harper Mansion, a place of unimaginable luxury, and yet, already she felt the tension lurking beneath its polished surface. Emily rose from the bed, her feet sinking into the thick carpet as she crossed the room. She hesitated for a moment before opening the door and stepping into the hallway. The house was eerily quiet, with only the distant ticking of a grandfather clock echoing through the vast corridors. As she made her way downstairs, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The grandeur of the mansion was overwhelming, but it was the undercurrent of suspicion that had settled over her the night before that weighed heavily on her mind. When she reached the bottom of the staircase, Emily noticed a figure standing near the large windows overlooking the garden. It was Victoria, the same woman who had greeted her with thinly veiled hostility the night before. Victoria was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, her back straight and her gaze fixed outside. Emily paused, unsure if she should make her presence known. But before she could decide, Victoria turned and caught sight of her. "Good morning," Emily said cautiously, trying to keep her voice steady. Victoria's expression didn't soften. If anything, her gaze grew even more scrutinizing as she took in Emily's appearance. "Good morning," she replied, her tone polite but distant. "I see you've settled in." Emily nodded, feeling the tension in the air thickening with each passing second. "Yes, thank you. I appreciate the hospitality." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing Emily's words. After a moment of silence, she spoke again, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "I'm sure William explained to you that this arrangement is unusual." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had sensed Victoria's disapproval from the start, but now it was being laid bare. "I understand," Emily said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I'm just desperate." Victoria finished for her, her tone lacking any trace of sympathy. "I can see that." Emily flinched at the bluntness of the remark, but she forced herself to hold Victoria's gaze. "Yes, I am," she admitted. "I've been through a lot recently, and I'm just trying to find my way." For a brief moment, something flickered in Victoria's eyes, perhaps a hint of understanding, or maybe just the recognition of Emily's honesty. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the same cool indifference. "I see," Victoria said again, turning her attention back to the view outside. "Just remember that this is a temporary arrangement. William has a kind heart, but that doesn't mean everyone here shares his generosity." The words hung in the air like a warning, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She understood perfectly well what Victoria was implying. She was an outsider, and no amount of kindness from William would change that. For now, she would have to tread carefully. Before Emily could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Good morning, Emily." Emily turned to see a young woman descending the stairs with an air of effortless grace. She was strikingly beautiful, with blonde hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders and a warm smile that seemed out of place in the otherwise tense atmosphere of the mansion. This was Lauren, William's son Michael's fiancée, as she would soon learn. "Good morning," Emily replied, relieved by the friendly tone in Lauren's voice. Lauren approached, her smile unwavering as she extended a hand. "I'm Lauren. I heard you arrived last night. I hope you're finding everything comfortable." Emily shook her hand, feeling a bit of the weight on her shoulders lift. "Thank you, Lauren. Yes, the room is lovely." "Good," Lauren said, her eyes sparkling with genuine warmth. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We're happy to have you here." As Lauren spoke, Emily couldn't help but notice the way Victoria's expression tightened ever so slightly, as if the younger woman's friendliness was somehow a betrayal. The dynamics in this house were clearly more complex than they seemed, and Emily was already beginning to feel like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. But Lauren's kindness, however genuine, was a welcome reprieve. It was a small comfort in a house that, despite its grandeur, felt anything but welcoming. As the three women stood there in the morning light, the contrast between them was stark. Victoria, with her sharp edges and icy demeanor, represented the cold, unyielding nature of the world Emily had been thrust into. Lauren, with her easy smile and open friendliness, seemed like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that not everyone in this house saw her as an intruder. But beneath the surface, Emily knew there was more at play. She could feel the weight of the unspoken tensions, the hidden resentments, and the deep-rooted suspicions. And she couldn't shake the feeling that her presence here was only going to make things more complicated. As Lauren chatted with her, asking about her plans for the day, Emily found herself smiling politely, though her mind was elsewhere. She had a lot to figure out: how to navigate this unfamiliar world, how to earn her keep, and most importantly, how to stay out of Victoria's way. It was clear that not everyone in the Harper household was pleased with her being there, and Emily knew she couldn't afford to make any more enemies. As breakfast was served and the day began, Emily was left with a lingering sense of unease. This mansion, with all its beauty and luxury, was also filled with secrets, and as much as she needed the safety it offered, she couldn't forget that she was a stranger in a place that wasn't her own. Days passed, and Emily's initial relief at having found shelter in the Harper mansion slowly gave way to a growing sense of unease. The house, with its vast rooms and elegant decor, was a stark contrast to the life she had known. But it wasn't just the physical grandeur that made her uncomfortable. It was the people within its walls, particularly Victoria and Lauren. From the moment she arrived, Emily felt the weight of their scrutiny. Victoria's cold gaze followed her whenever they crossed paths, a silent reminder that she was an outsider, tolerated but not welcome. Lauren, on the other hand, maintained her friendly demeanor, but there was an edge to it, a subtle shift in tone whenever Michael, William's son, was nearby. It didn't take long for Emily to understand why. Lauren saw her as a potential threat, someone who might disrupt the carefully constructed plans she had for her future with Michael. Emily did her best to keep a low profile. She spent most of her time in her room or helping the household staff with small tasks, even though William had insisted she didn't have to. The mansion's employees were kind, but they too seemed wary of her, as if unsure how to treat this young woman who had suddenly appeared in their world. One afternoon, Emily was in the garden, seeking solace among the carefully tended flowers. The garden was one of the few places where she felt at peace, a brief escape from the tension that hung over the mansion like a storm cloud. She was lost in thought, pulling weeds from the flower beds, when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Michael standing a few feet away, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his tone casual. Emily shook her head, feeling a nervous flutter in her chest. "Not at all." Michael stepped closer, crouching down to help with the weeds. For a few minutes, they worked in silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of the city. Emily stole a glance at him, wondering what had brought him to the garden. Michael was someone she had seen little of since arriving at the mansion. He was often away on business, and when he was home, he seemed distant, almost aloof. "I noticed you've been spending a lot of time out here," Michael said after a while, breaking the silence. Emily nodded, unsure of what to say. "It's peaceful here. I like it." Michael smiled faintly. "It is. My mother used to spend hours in this garden. She loved it." Emily looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." He shook his head. "It's all right. It was a long time ago." There was a pause before he continued. "You don't have to do this, you know. The staff can take care of the garden." "I know," Emily replied softly, "but it gives me something to do. I don't want to be a burden." Michael's eyes softened. "You're not a burden, Emily. My father wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't want you to feel at home." The kindness in his words caught her off guard, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of hope. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Victoria's icy gaze and Lauren's wary smiles. She had been trying so hard to fit in, to prove that she wasn't here to cause trouble, but it seemed like no matter what she did, she couldn't shake the feeling of being unwanted. "Thank you," Emily said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I'm not sure how I fit into all of this." Michael's expression grew thoughtful. "It's a big change, I imagine, but you're here now, and that's what matters. Don't worry about the rest." Emily wanted to believe him, but the doubts lingered. How could she not worry when every interaction seemed to reinforce that she was an outsider? As they continued to work in the garden, Emily couldn't help but wonder what Michael truly thought of her. Was he as skeptical as his fiancée, or was he genuinely trying to make her feel welcome? Later that evening, Emily joined the family for dinner. The dining room, with its long table and crystal chandeliers, was as intimidating as ever. She took her seat, feeling the tension in the room as Victoria and Lauren exchanged glances. William tried to keep the conversation light, but it was clear that something was brewing beneath the surface. As the meal progressed, Lauren began to steer the conversation toward her upcoming wedding with Michael, her tone sweet but with an underlying sharpness that wasn't lost on Emily. "So, Emily," Lauren said, turning her attention to her, "have you thought about what you'll do next? I mean, now that you're getting back on your feet?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Emily felt her cheeks flush as she tried to think of a response. Lauren's words, though polite on the surface, carried a clear message. Emily's stay here was temporary, and she needed to remember that. "I'm not sure yet," Emily admitted, her voice hesitant. "I'm just taking things one day at a time." Lauren smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's understandable. It must be difficult, not having a plan." Before Emily could respond, Victoria interjected, her tone cold and precise. "I'm sure Emily will figure something out, but it's important that she understands the importance of moving forward. We all have to find our place, after all." The words stung, even though they were delivered with a veneer of civility. Emily looked down at her plate, her appetite gone. She had never felt so small, so out of place. It was as if she were a guest at a party where everyone else knew the rules, and she was constantly one misstep away from being asked to leave. William, sensing the discomfort, tried to change the subject, but the damage had been done. Emily could feel the walls closing in, the sense of being unwanted growing stronger with each passing moment. After dinner, Emily retreated to her room, the sense of isolation weighing heavily on her. She sat by the window, looking out at the darkened garden below. The mansion, with all its beauty, had become a gilded cage, and no matter how hard she tried to adapt, to fit in, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. In the days that followed, Emily threw herself into helping around the house, hoping that by keeping busy, she could stave off the doubts and insecurities that plagued her. But the more she tried to blend in, the more she felt like an outsider. Every glance, every whispered conversation, seemed to remind her that she was different, that she didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. She found herself spending more and more time in the garden, where the flowers offered a silent comfort that the mansion's walls could not. But even there, the weight of her situation was inescapable. The whispers, the cold stares, the sense of being an unwelcome guest. It all pressed down on her, making it harder to breathe. As the days turned into weeks, Emily realized that surviving in the Harper mansion was going to be just as difficult as surviving on the streets. But she was determined to find a way through, to prove that she was more than just a charity case. She had come too far to give up now. The tension in the Harper mansion continued to simmer as the days passed, but amidst the unease, something unexpected began to happen. Emily found herself drawing closer to Michael. It wasn't intentional, at least not at first. Their interactions started off as brief and casual, often revolving around the garden or the household tasks she had taken upon herself. But gradually, those moments grew longer, their conversations deeper, and Emily began to see a side of Michael that surprised her. It was one afternoon when the connection between them truly started to take shape. Emily was in the garden, as usual, tending to the flowers she had grown fond of. The sun was warm, and the air carried the faint scent of blooming roses. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice Michael approaching until he was standing right beside her. "You've done a lot with this garden," he remarked, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. Emily looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun with her hand. "I guess I have," she replied with a small smile. "It's become my little sanctuary." Michael crouched down next to her, examining the flowers with a thoughtful expression. "It shows. The place looks better than it has in years. My mother would have loved it." There was a wistful tone in his voice that caught Emily off guard. She had learned bits and pieces about Michael's mother over the past few weeks, mostly through hushed conversations between the staff or in passing remarks from William. She had been a kind and gentle woman, loved by everyone, and her death had left a void in the family that was still painfully evident. "I'm glad I could help," Emily said softly, sensing that this was a rare moment of openness from Michael. He glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've done more than just help, Emily. You've brought something back to this place, something that's been missing for a long time." Emily wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had never considered that her presence, something that had caused so much tension, could also bring something positive. The idea warmed her, even as she tried to downplay it in her mind. "I'm just trying to keep busy," she said, a little embarrassed by the praise. Michael's smile widened, and for the first time, Emily noticed how his eyes softened when he looked at her. "You don't give yourself enough credit." You've brought life back to this garden, and maybe to this house too." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, working side by side in the garden. Emily found herself enjoying these moments with Michael more than she expected. He was different from the aloof, distant figure she had first met. There was a warmth to him, a quiet kindness that he didn't often show, especially not around his fiancée, Lauren. Speaking of Lauren, her presence had become increasingly strained whenever she was around Emily. The tension between them was almost palpable, though Lauren did her best to maintain her polished exterior. But it was clear that she didn't like the growing bond between Emily and Michael, and she wasn't shy about showing it in subtle, passive-aggressive ways. One evening, after another tense dinner, Emily was in the living room, absently flipping through a book. The mansion felt oppressive that night, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. She was about to retreat to her room when Michael entered, looking more serious than usual. "Emily, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his tone leaving no room for refusal. She nodded, closing the book and setting it aside. "Of course." Michael took a seat across from her, his expression conflicted. He seemed to be searching for the right words, something Emily wasn't used to seeing from him. Usually, he was so composed, so sure of himself. "Look," he began, running a hand through his hair. "I know things have been difficult for you here, and I know that Lauren hasn't exactly made it easier." Emily swallowed, unsure of where this was going. "It's been a little awkward, yes," she admitted. Michael sighed, leaning forward slightly. "I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've done since you got here. I know it hasn't been easy, and I'm sorry if Lauren or anyone else has made you feel unwelcome." Emily was taken aback by the apology, especially coming from Michael. She had expected him to side with Lauren, to defend her actions, but instead, he was acknowledging the difficulty of the situation. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to Emily. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know I'm not exactly an easy person to have around." Michael shook his head. "It's not about that. Lauren, she's been under a lot of pressure with the wedding coming up, and she tends to get protective. But that doesn't excuse her behavior, and I'll talk to her about it." Emily appreciated the sentiment, but she knew that talking to Lauren wouldn't change anything. The issue ran deeper than just a few harsh words or cold looks. Lauren saw her as a threat, and no amount of reasoning would change that. "It's okay, Michael," Emily said, trying to ease the tension. "I don't want to cause any trouble. I'm just trying to get by, same as anyone else." Michael studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand something he couldn't quite grasp. Finally, he nodded. "I know, and I want you to know that you're not alone in this. If you ever need anything, or if things get too difficult, you can come to me." There was an earnestness in his voice that made Emily's heart skip a beat. For the first time since she had arrived at the mansion, she felt like she wasn't entirely alone, like there was someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to give her a renewed sense of hope. Over the next few days, Emily and Michael spent more time together, often finding themselves in the garden or taking walks around the estate. Their conversations ranged from lighthearted banter to deeper discussions about life, family, and everything in between. Michael opened up about his mother's death, how it had affected him and his relationship with his father, and Emily shared some of her own struggles, though she was careful not to reveal too much about the hardships she had faced on the streets. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and it didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the household. William seemed pleased, as if he had hoped for this connection all along, but Lauren's resentment was becoming harder to conceal. She was polite to Emily's face, but the undercurrent of hostility was unmistakable. One evening, after a long day of work in the garden, Emily and Michael found themselves sitting on a bench, watching the sun set over the horizon. The sky was a brilliant mix of oranges and pinks, casting a warm glow over the estate. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt almost normal, as if the tensions of the mansion didn't exist for a little while. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Michael asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. Emily looked at him, surprised by the question. "Leaving? The mansion?" He nodded, his gaze still fixed on the sunset. "Yes. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just go somewhere else, start over." Emily considered his words, a mix of emotions swirling within her. "I've thought about it," she admitted. "But I don't have anywhere else to go." Michael finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a sincerity that took her breath away. "Maybe that's something we could figure out together." Emily's heart skipped a beat at the implication in his words. There was something unspoken between them, something that had been growing since the day they met. But before she could respond, the sound of footsteps approaching broke the moment. Lauren appeared, her expression unreadable as she looked between Emily and Michael. "Dinner's ready," she said, her tone flat. Michael stood up, his eyes lingering on Emily for a moment longer before he nodded. "We'll be right there." As Lauren walked away, Emily felt the tension return, thicker than ever. She and Michael had shared something important in that moment, but whatever it was fragile, easily shattered by the harsh realities of the world they lived in. As they headed back to the mansion, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. The bond between her and Michael had grown stronger, but it had also become more complicated. And she couldn't help but wonder if they were both about to face the consequences of that connection. As Emily and Michael's bond grew stronger, the atmosphere in the Harper mansion grew increasingly tense. Lauren could sense the subtle shift in Michael's demeanor, the way he smiled more easily when Emily was around, the shared glances that carried unspoken words. It was a change she neither welcomed nor intended to tolerate. Lauren had worked too hard to secure her place in the Harper family, and she wasn't about to let someone like Emily jeopardize everything she had built. Determined to regain control, Lauren began to craft a plan. She knew that direct confrontation wouldn't work. Michael was already too sympathetic towards Emily. Instead, she needed to undermine Emily's position in the household in a way that would turn everyone, including Michael, against her. It was a delicate operation, one that required patience, subtlety, and, most importantly, manipulation. It started with small things. Lauren would make casual comments to the staff, hinting at Emily's potential ulterior motives for staying at the mansion. "She's been spending a lot of time with Michael lately," Lauren would say with a knowing look. "I just hope she's not getting the wrong idea." The servants, who were already wary of Emily, began to whisper amongst themselves, their suspicions slowly taking root. Next, Lauren focused on Victoria, who already disliked Emily's presence. Over tea one afternoon, Lauren planted seeds of doubt in the older woman's mind. "Victoria," Lauren began, her tone casual but her words carefully chosen. "Have you noticed how close Emily and Michael have become? I'm sure it's nothing, but, well, people do talk." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she took a sip of her tea. "What exactly are you suggesting, Lauren?" "Oh, nothing concrete, of course," Lauren replied, feigning innocence. "It's just that, with Emily's background, you can't help but wonder what her intentions might be. She's had a difficult life, and I can't blame her for wanting stability. But I do worry that she might see Michael as a way to secure that." Victoria set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "I've had my concerns about her from the beginning. William's bleeding heart often blinds him to people's true motives. But Michael, he's not foolish enough to fall for someone like her." "Of course not," Lauren agreed quickly, hiding her satisfaction. "But it might be wise to keep an eye on things, just in case. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings to arise, especially with the wedding so close." Victoria nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll speak to Michael. This needs to be nipped in the bud before it becomes a problem." As expected, Victoria wasted no time in confronting Michael. That evening, she found him in his study, going over some paperwork. Her approach was direct, leaving no room for evasion. "Michael, we need to talk," Victoria said, her tone brooking no argument. Michael looked up from his work, sensing the seriousness in his mother's voice. "What's wrong?" "It's about Emily," Victoria began, choosing her words carefully. "I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with her lately. I understand that you want to be kind, but you need to be careful. She's vulnerable, and it's easy for someone in her position to misconstrue your intentions." Michael frowned, leaning back in his chair. "What are you trying to say, Mother?" Victoria sighed, as if the burden of what she was about to say weighed heavily on her. "I'm saying that Emily might see you as more than just a friend. She's been through a lot, and she might be looking for something more. Something that could complicate things, especially with Lauren." Michael's expression darkened as he absorbed his mother's words. "You're assuming a lot, Mother. Emily and I are just friends. There's nothing more to it." "Maybe not on your end," Victoria pressed. "But are you sure she feels the same way?" "Michael, you have to think about Lauren. About the family. We've worked hard to build a life here, and we can't afford any disruptions, especially now." The mention of Lauren gave Michael pause. He knew his fiancée was under a lot of pressure with the wedding preparations, and the last thing he wanted was to cause her more stress. But the idea that Emily might have ulterior motives didn't sit well with him. He had come to trust her, to see her as someone who genuinely needed help, not as a manipulator. "I appreciate your concern, Mother," Michael said carefully, "but I don't believe Emily is trying to cause any trouble. She's been through enough already." Victoria's lips thinned. "Just be careful, Michael. The last thing we need is for anything to go wrong." The conversation left Michael unsettled. He didn't want to doubt Emily, but his mother's words lingered in his mind, sowing seeds of uncertainty. The next time he saw Emily, there was a hint of distance in his demeanor, something she immediately noticed. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked one afternoon as they worked in the garden together. Michael hesitated, unsure of how to express his concerns without offending her. "I've just been thinking," he began slowly, "about everything that's happened since you came here." Emily's heart sank. She could feel the shift, the subtle withdrawal in his tone, and she knew something was wrong. "Did I do something to upset you?" "No," Michael replied quickly, his eyes meeting hers with sincerity. "It's not that. It's just, people are talking, Emily, and I don't want you to get hurt because of it." She looked at him, confusion and hurt swirling in her chest. "Talking about what?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "About us. About how much time we've been spending together. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea, especially not Lauren." The mention of Lauren made Emily's stomach twist. She had always sensed the tension between them, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real, more threatening. "I understand," she said quietly, trying to mask the pain in her voice. "I don't want to cause any problems." Michael reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not causing problems, Emily. I want to make sure we're both being careful. That's all." Emily forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. I wouldn't want to make things difficult for you." As they continued their work, the easy camaraderie they had shared began to feel strained. Emily could sense the shift in Michael, the way he was now more guarded, more cautious around her. It was as if the bond they had built was slowly unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Lauren, meanwhile, was quietly pleased with the results of her efforts, but she knew she couldn't stop there. To secure her position, she needed to do something more decisive, something that would remove Emily as a threat once and for all. It was then that Lauren decided to take a drastic step, one that would ensure her place in the Harper family for good. She would fake a pregnancy. The idea came to her one night as she lay awake, thinking about how to tighten her grip on Michael. A baby would change everything. It would bind Michael to her in a way that no one, not even someone like Emily, could ever challenge. It would also end any doubts Victoria or William might have about their union. They would see her as the perfect match for Michael, the future mother of the Harper legacy. Lauren wasted no time in putting her plan into action. She began dropping hints about feeling unwell, making subtle comments about how she was late. When Michael asked if she was all right, she played the part perfectly, expressing just enough concern to make him worry without revealing too much too soon. Then, one morning, she made her move. She told Michael she needed to go to the doctor, acting anxious and nervous. When she returned, she was pale and quiet, carefully crafting the image of a woman who had just received life-changing news. "Lauren, what's wrong?" Michael asked, his concern genuine as he took her hand. She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes, but there was a glint of triumph hidden beneath her facade. "Michael, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like a bombshell, and Michael's reaction was exactly what Lauren had hoped for. He was stunned, overwhelmed, and then, slowly, his expression softened into one of joy and disbelief. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lauren nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek for added effect. I'm sure. Michael pulled her into a tight embrace, his heart pounding with the news. This is incredible, Lauren. I can't believe it. Lauren smiled against his chest, her arms wrapping around him as she whispered, We're going to be a family, Michael. Nothing will ever come between us now. As Michael held her, the weight of the news began to settle in. A baby would change everything. His priorities, his future, even his relationship with Emily. And as much as he cared for Emily, he knew that his focus had to shift to Lauren and their unborn child. It was a responsibility he couldn't ignore, and one that would inevitably push Emily further out of his life. The news of Lauren's pregnancy spread quickly through the Harper mansion, and with it, the final nail was driven into the coffin of Emily's connection with Michael. The bond they had shared, the tentative friendship that had blossomed, was now overshadowed by the impending arrival of a new life, one that left no room for Emily. As the days passed, Emily found herself increasingly isolated. The whispers grew louder, the looks more pointed, and even William, who had always been kind to her, seemed distant. The mansion, once a place of refuge, had become a gilded cage, trapping her in a situation she could no longer endure. Lauren's plan had worked perfectly. Emily was now more alone than ever, and with the Harper family focused on the future, she knew it was only a matter of time before she would be forced to leave. But before that could happen, there was one more truth that had to come to light. One that would shatter Lauren's carefully constructed lies and change everything once again. The days following Lauren's announcement of her pregnancy were a whirlwind of activity and emotion in the Harper mansion. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically, with everyone now focused on the future addition to the family. Michael was caught up in the excitement, already making plans for the nursery and talking to William about the legacy this child would inherit. It seemed like the perfect distraction from the growing tension that had previously filled the house. But beneath the surface, doubts were beginning to gnaw at Michael. At first, Michael pushed these doubts aside, attributing them to the overwhelming nature of the news. After all, becoming a father was a life-changing event, and it was natural to feel uncertain. But the more time passed, the more those doubts grew, until they were impossible to ignore. Something wasn't right, and deep down, Michael knew it. It started with small things: Lauren's sudden changes in behavior, the way she avoided talking about the pregnancy in detail, and her reluctance to let him accompany her to doctor's appointments. Whenever he asked about it, she had a perfectly reasonable explanation. She was just nervous, she said, or it was a routine checkup that didn't require him to be there. But Michael's instincts told him otherwise. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Michael came home to find Lauren in the living room, chatting animatedly with Victoria about baby names. She looked up when he entered, her smile bright and cheerful, but Michael could see the tension in her eyes. "How was your day?" Lauren asked, her tone sweet as she stood to greet him. Michael forced a smile. "Busy, but good. How about you?" "Oh, just the usual," she replied, waving her hand dismissively. "Victoria and I were just discussing nursery ideas." Michael nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed to know the truth, and the only way to do that was to confront Lauren directly. After dinner, when they were alone in their bedroom, he decided to bring up his concerns. "Lauren," Michael began, his voice calm but firm, "there's something I need to talk to you about." She looked up from her book, her expression instantly guarded. "What is it?" Michael hesitated, searching for the right words. "I've been thinking a lot about the pregnancy, and I have some concerns." Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly. "Concerns? What do you mean?" "I mean that something doesn't feel right," Michael continued, watching her closely. "You've been avoiding certain topics, and you haven't let me come to any of the doctor's appointments with you. It's making me wonder if there's something you're not telling me." Lauren's expression hardened, a flicker of anger flashing in her eyes. "Are you accusing me of lying about this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Michael replied, keeping his tone steady. "I just need to understand what's going on. If there's something you're worried about, we can deal with it together. But I need to know the truth, Lauren." For a moment, Lauren said nothing, her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to handle the situation. She had been so careful, so meticulous in crafting her story, But Michael's suspicion was a threat she hadn't fully anticipated. She knew she had to think fast. "Michael, I'm not lying," Lauren said, her voice trembling slightly as she tried to summon tears. "I've just been scared. This pregnancy wasn't planned, and I've been so worried about everything, about us, about the future. That's why I've been distant. But I promise you, I'm not hiding anything." Her words were convincing, and for a moment, Michael wanted to believe her. But there was still that nagging feeling, that doubt that wouldn't go away. "I want to trust you, Lauren," Michael said quietly, "but I think we should go to the doctor together, just to make sure everything is okay." Lauren's heart skipped a beat, panic rising in her chest. She knew she couldn't allow that to happen. If Michael insisted on going to the doctor, her entire charade would fall apart. Desperate, she decided to play her final card. "I can't believe you're doing this," Lauren said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I thought you trusted me. I thought we were in this together. But if you're going to treat me like a liar, then maybe we shouldn't be having this baby at all." The ultimatum hung in the air, and Michael felt his resolve waver. He didn't want to push Lauren away, didn't want to risk losing her or the future they were supposed to build together. But the doubt remained, and he knew he couldn't ignore it. "We'll talk about this tomorrow," Michael said, his voice weary. "I need some time to think." He left the room, leaving Lauren alone with her thoughts. As soon as he was gone, her facade crumbled, and she sank onto the bed, her mind racing with fear. She had pushed too hard, and now she was on the brink of losing everything. She needed a way out, something to solidify her story before it all unraveled. The next morning, while Michael was at work, Lauren made a call to a friend who worked at a private clinic. She needed records, something to prove the pregnancy and buy her more time. Her friend was reluctant, but with enough persuasion, Lauren managed to secure what she needed. When Michael returned home that evening, Lauren was waiting for him, a folder in hand. "I'm sorry about last night," she said softly, holding out the folder. "I went to the clinic today. Here are the records. I hope this puts your mind at ease." Michael took the folder, his expression unreadable as he opened it. The documents looked official: ultrasound images, medical notes, everything he would expect to see. But as he flipped through the pages, something caught his eye, a detail so small it could easily have been overlooked. The dates didn't match up. Michael's heart began to race as he examined the documents more closely. It was subtle, but it was there. A discrepancy that didn't make sense. He looked up at Lauren, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Lauren," Michael said slowly, his voice tense, "why do these dates seem off?" Lauren's face paled, her mind scrambling for an explanation. "What do you mean? They should be correct. Maybe it's just a clerical error." But Michael wasn't buying it. The doubt that had been gnawing at him for days now erupted into full-blown suspicion. He knew something was wrong, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. "I don't think this is a mistake," Michael said, his voice hardening. "Lauren, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you really pregnant?" The question hung in the air like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Lauren's mind raced, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had been so close to pulling it off, but now, with Michael staring at her, demanding the truth, she realized there was no way out. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were real, born of fear and desperation. "Michael, please. Are you pregnant?" Michael repeated, his voice low and furious. Lauren's facade shattered completely. She couldn't keep up the lie any longer. The weight of it, the fear of losing everything, was too much. With a sob, she finally broke. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm not pregnant." Michael's world seemed to stop. He stared at Lauren, the woman he had planned to marry, the woman who had just lied to him in the most profound way imaginable. He felt a wave of betrayal, anger, and disbelief wash over him, leaving him numb. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this?" Lauren couldn't meet his gaze. She had no good answer, no excuse that could justify what she had done. "I was afraid of losing you," she admitted through her tears. I thought if you believed I was pregnant, you'd stay with me, that nothing could come between us." Michael shook his head, his hands trembling with rage. "You lied to me. You used a baby. A baby that doesn't even exist, to manipulate me. How could you do that? Lauren reached out to him, but he recoiled, stepping back as if her touch burned him. Michael, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Michael felt the last shred of trust he had in Lauren slip away, leaving only a cold, hollow anger in its place. I can't do this, he said, his voice cold. I can't marry someone who would lie to me like this. We're done, Lauren. Lauren's tears flowed freely now, panic setting in as she realized what she had lost. Michael, please, don't do this. We can work through it. I'll make it right, I promise. But Michael was already walking away, his mind made up. It's over, Lauren. I can't be with you anymore. He left the room, slamming the door behind him. Lauren collapsed onto the floor, sobbing as the reality of her situation sank in. She had gambled everything on a lie, and now she had lost it all: Michael, the future she had envisioned, and the Harper family's trust. As Michael walked through the empty corridors of the mansion, his heart heavy with betrayal, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. The trust that had been shattered couldn't be repaired, and the future he had once imagined was now in ruins. But in the midst of his anger and pain, there was also a sense of relief. Relief that the truth had finally come to light, even if it had come at a devastating cost. The tension in the Harper mansion reached a fever pitch in the days following Michael's discovery of Lauren's deception. Word of the false pregnancy spread quickly, igniting a firestorm of gossip and whispers among the household staff. Even the walls seemed to hum with the scandal that had rocked the very foundation of the Harper family. For Lauren, the fallout was swift and brutal. Victoria was the first to confront her. The morning after Michael ended their engagement, Lauren found herself summoned to the grand parlor, where Victoria was waiting. The older woman's posture was rigid, her eyes cold and unforgiving. Gone was the polite, measured demeanor she had always maintained. In its place was a fury that Lauren had never seen before. Lauren, Victoria began, her voice like ice. I have given you the benefit of the doubt more times than I can count. I have tolerated your ambitions and your schemes because I believed, however naively, that you had Michael's best interests at heart. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined. Lauren stood before her, pale and trembling, her mind racing to find some way to defend herself. But there was no defense against the truth, no way to excuse the lie she had so carefully constructed. Victoria, she started, but Victoria cut her off with a sharp gesture. Don't, Victoria snapped, her voice low and furious. Don't try to explain this away. You lied about something so sacred, so fundamental to our family's future, that I can hardly believe you had the audacity to do it. You have made a fool of my son, of me, and of this entire family. Lauren's throat tightened, tears welling in her eyes as she realized the full extent of what she had done. She had known there would be consequences, but she had never anticipated how severe they would be. Now, standing before Victoria, she felt the weight of her actions crashing down on her like a tidal wave. I'm sorry, Lauren whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was afraid of losing him. Afraid of losing him? Victoria repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. You lost him the moment you decided to lie. You lost him because you couldn't trust in your own worth, in your relationship, to stand on its own. You lost him because you were willing to manipulate the very foundation of what it means to be a family. The words cut deep, and Lauren felt her knees weaken as she tried to process the enormity of her mistake. She had thought that a lie could hold everything together, that she could bend the truth to fit her desires. But all she had done was shatter everything she had worked so hard to build. I'll do anything to make this right, Lauren pleaded, desperate now. Please, just give me a chance to fix it. Victoria shook her head, her expression one of cold finality. There is nothing left to fix, Lauren. The damage is done, and it cannot be undone. You are no longer welcome in this house. Pack your things and leave immediately. I will make arrangements for your departure. The words hit Lauren like a physical blow, and she stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. But where will I go? What will I do? That is no longer my concern, Victoria replied, her tone merciless. "You should have thought of that before you betrayed us." With that, Victoria turned and walked out of the room, leaving Lauren standing alone in the grand parlor, her world crumbling around her. The realization that she had lost everything, Michael, her future, her place in the Harper family, was too much to bear. She had played her cards, and she had lost spectacularly. In a daze, Lauren made her way to her room, where she began to pack her belongings. The once luxurious space now felt like a prison, its opulence a stark reminder of what she was leaving behind. Every item she placed in her suitcase felt like a nail in the coffin of the life she had envisioned. She had come to the Harper mansion with dreams of power and status, but now she was leaving in disgrace, with nothing but her own actions to blame. As she packed, Lauren thought back to all the moments that had led her to this point. The decisions she had made, the lies she had told, the people she had hurt. She had convinced herself that she was doing it all for Michael, for their future, but now she could see the truth. It had always been about her fears, her insecurities, her need for control. The final blow came when William entered the room, his expression somber. Lauren had always seen William as a father figure, someone who believed in her even when others didn't. But now, as he looked at her with disappointment etched into his features, she realized that even that connection was gone. "Lauren," William said quietly, "I'm sorry it has come to this. I had hoped you could find a place in our family, that you and Michael could build something lasting together. But this, what you've done, I can't defend it." Lauren's lip trembled as she tried to hold back her tears. "William, There's nothing more to say," William interrupted gently, but firmly. "Victoria has already made the arrangements. A car will take you to a hotel in the city. From there, you'll need to figure out your next steps." The finality of his words crushed any hope Lauren had left. She nodded numbly, unable to find the words to express the guilt and regret that now consumed her. William gave her one last, sorrowful look before turning to leave, leaving Lauren to face the reality of her situation alone. By the time she finished packing, the car was waiting outside. The servants, who had once treated her with respect and deference, now avoided her gaze as she made her way through the mansion for the last time. The grand halls, the beautiful rooms, the garden where she had once envisioned her future, all of it was lost to her now. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Lauren couldn't help but look back at the mansion one last time. It stood there, majestic and imposing, a symbol of the life she had almost had. But that life was no longer hers, and she knew that she could never return. With a heavy heart, Lauren climbed into the car, the door closing with a final, resounding thud. As the car pulled away, she felt a wave of emotions: grief, anger, regret, but most of all, an overwhelming sense of loss. She had gambled everything on a lie, and now she was paying the price. The ride to the hotel was silent, the weight of her actions pressing down on her with every passing mile. She had lost Michael, the man she thought she loved, but more than that, she had lost herself in the process. The woman she had become, calculating, deceitful, driven by fear, was a stranger to her now, and she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever find her way back. When the car finally stopped in front of the hotel, Lauren got out, her movements robotic as she checked in and made her way to the small, impersonal room that would be her home for the foreseeable future. As she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank walls, the full weight of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. She had nothing left. No family, no friends, no future. She had burned every bridge, and now she was truly alone. Back at the Harper mansion, the mood was somber, but there was also a sense of relief. The source of so much tension and deception had been removed, and for the first time in months, there was a sense of peace. But the consequences of Lauren's actions would linger, affecting everyone in ways they couldn't yet fully understand. For Michael, the end of his engagement marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, but also with the possibility of healing and growth. And for Emily, who had witnessed the rise and fall of Lauren from the sidelines, it was a bittersweet reminder of the fragile nature of trust and the power of truth. As the mansion settled into a new rhythm, one thing was clear: The Harper family had been forever changed by the events of the past few weeks, and as they moved forward, they would do so with the knowledge that sometimes the truth is the only foundation on which a future can be built. The days following Lauren's departure were a time of reflection and quiet healing in the Harper mansion. The tension that had once gripped the household slowly dissipated, leaving behind a sense of calm that had been absent for far too long. For Michael, the end of his engagement was bittersweet. Though the revelation of Lauren's lies had left him reeling, there was also a sense of liberation, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. But with that freedom came the daunting task of piecing his life back together. Emily, too, felt the change in the air. The oppressive atmosphere that had clouded her every interaction in the mansion was gone, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. But with that peace came uncertainty. She had always tried to stay out of the family's internal conflicts, but now, with Lauren gone and Michael's relationship in ruins, she found herself drawn closer to him than ever before. It started with small gestures. Michael would seek her out in the garden or invite her to join him for a walk around the estate. Their conversations, once casual and polite, grew deeper, more meaningful. They talked about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Emily shared more about her life before the Harper mansion, the struggles she had faced on the streets, and the loss of her mother. Michael listened with empathy, often offering quiet words of comfort or simply being there for her when she needed to talk. One evening, after a particularly long day, Michael found Emily sitting on a bench in the garden, staring up at the stars. The night was cool and clear, the sky a canvas of twinkling lights. He approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her thoughts, but Emily turned to him with a soft smile as he drew near. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Not at all," Emily replied, shifting slightly to make room for him on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the night filling the space between them. Michael found himself glancing at Emily, admiring the way the soft light of the moon highlighted her features. There was something about her, something resilient and quietly strong, that drew him in, and he realized that his feelings for her had grown far beyond mere friendship. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Michael said eventually, breaking the silence. Emily looked at him, her curiosity piqued. "About what?" "About everything," he replied, his gaze distant. "About Lauren, the lies, what the future holds, and about you." Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and she turned her full attention to him, waiting for him to continue. "You've been through so much, Emily," Michael said, his voice full of sincerity. "And yet, you've been nothing but kind and strong through it all. I don't know how you do it." Emily blushed, slightly embarrassed by the praise. "I've just tried to survive, like anyone would." "But you've done more than that," Michael insisted, his eyes locking onto hers. "You've brought something back to this house, something we lost a long time ago. You've given me hope again, Emily." She could hear the emotion in his voice, and it touched something deep within her. For so long, Emily had felt like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong. But now, sitting here with Michael, she felt like she had finally found a place where she was accepted, where she could be herself without fear or shame. "Michael," Emily began, choosing her words carefully, "I don't know what the future holds for either of us, but I'm grateful to have met you. You've been a friend to me when I had no one else, and that means more to me than I can say." Michael's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand in his. The gesture was simple, but it conveyed everything he was feeling: his gratitude, his affection, and something more, something he wasn't quite ready to name. "Emily," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "I don't want to lose you. Not now, not ever." The words hung in the air, and Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. She had sensed the growing connection between them, but hearing him say it aloud made it all the more real. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that matched her own, and she knew, in that moment, that their relationship had shifted into something deeper, something that neither of them could deny. "I don't want to lose you either," Emily replied, her voice trembling with emotion. For a moment, they simply sat there, hands intertwined, the unspoken feelings between them growing stronger with each passing second. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, connected by a bond that had been forged in the fires of hardship and trust. As the evening wore on, they continued to talk, their conversation weaving between lighthearted banter and deeper, more personal topics. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams for the future, and the moments that had shaped them into who they were. The more they talked, the more they realized how much they had in common, how their experiences had brought them to this point, together. It wasn't long before their bond became the talk of the household. The staff, who had once regarded Emily with suspicion, now looked at her with newfound respect. Even Victoria, who had been so wary of her at first, began to soften. Though she was still grieving the loss of the future she had envisioned for Michael and Lauren, she couldn't deny the positive change she saw in her son. He was happier, more at ease, and it was clear that Emily was a big part of that transformation. William, too, took notice of the growing relationship between his son and Emily. Though he had always supported her presence in the house, he was careful not to interfere. He knew that Michael needed to find his own way, to heal from the pain of Lauren's betrayal in his own time. But as he watched the two of them together, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the future. A future that might be very different from the one he had imagined, but one that could be just as bright. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Michael made an announcement that caught everyone by surprise. "I've been thinking about taking a break from work," he said, glancing around the table. "I need some time to clear my head, to figure out what's next." William raised an eyebrow, but nodded in understanding. "That sounds like a good idea, Michael. You've been through a lot. Taking some time for yourself could be exactly what you need." Victoria, though initially hesitant, also voiced her support. "If it helps you find clarity, then I think it's the right decision." Emily remained quiet, though her heart was pounding. She wondered if this decision had anything to do with their recent conversations, if Michael was planning to ask her to join him on this journey of self-discovery. After dinner, Michael pulled Emily aside, his expression serious but hopeful. "I was wondering if you'd like to come with me," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not sure where I'm going yet, but I'd like you to be there with me." The invitation took her by surprise, but it also filled her with warmth. The idea of leaving the mansion, of exploring the world with Michael by her side, was both exhilarating and terrifying. But most of all, it was something she hadn't realized she desperately wanted until now. "I'd love to," Emily replied, her smile bright and genuine. And with that, their future together began to take shape. They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But they also knew that they had found something special in each other, something worth fighting for. As they prepared for the next chapter of their lives, the Harper Mansion, once filled with tension and uncertainty, began to feel like a place of hope and new beginnings. And for the first time in a long time, Emily and Michael both felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be, together. The decision to leave the Harper Mansion marked a turning point for both Emily and Michael. It was a chance to step away from the shadows of the past and embrace a future filled with possibility. As the day of their departure approached, the household buzzed with a mix of anticipation and bittersweet emotions. The staff, who had grown fond of Emily and admired the positive influence she had on Michael, wished them well, though there was a palpable sadness in seeing them go. On the morning of their departure, the sun rose over the mansion, casting a warm, golden light across the estate. Emily stood in her room, gazing out the window at the garden where she had spent so many hours finding solace. It was hard to believe that she was leaving this place that had been both a refuge and a battleground. But as she looked toward the future, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that she was not walking away from something, but rather towards something new and full of promise. Michael appeared in the doorway, a soft smile on his face as he watched her. "Ready?" he asked gently, his voice filled with quiet excitement. Emily turned to him, her own smile mirroring his. "As ready as I'll ever be." They made their way downstairs, where William and Victoria were waiting to see them off. The tension that had once defined their interactions had melted away, replaced by a mutual respect and understanding. William stepped forward, pulling Michael into a warm embrace. "Take care of yourself, son," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "And take care of her too. She's special." Michael nodded. his grip on his father tightening for just a moment before he stepped back. "I will, Dad. Thank you for everything." Victoria approached Emily, her expression softer than it had ever been. Though she had been slow to accept Emily, the time they had spent together had changed her perspective. She saw now that Emily wasn't the threat she had once feared, but rather a source of strength and goodness for her son. "Emily," Victoria said, her tone sincere, "thank you for everything you've done. You've brought a light back into this house and into Michael's life. I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner." Emily smiled, touched by the words. "Thank you, Victoria. It means a lot to hear you say that." With their goodbyes said, Emily and Michael walked out to the waiting car, their hands clasped together. As they drove away from the mansion, Emily couldn't help but look back one last time. The house, with all its grandeur and history, had been a place of both pain and healing. But now, it was time to move on. The road ahead was unknown, but that uncertainty was part of the appeal. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt free. Free from the past, free from the burdens that had weighed her down, and free to build a life with Michael, one that was theirs alone. Their journey took them out of the city, through winding country roads and small towns, until they reached the coast. It was here, by the sea, that Michael had found a small, secluded cottage, a place where they could start fresh, away from the pressures and expectations that had defined their lives in the Harper mansion. The cottage was simple, yet charming. It sat atop a cliff overlooking the ocean, with a garden that Emily immediately fell in love with. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and wildflowers, and the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was a constant, soothing presence. "This is perfect," Emily said, her voice filled with awe as they stood outside, taking in the view. Michael smiled, slipping his arm around her waist. "I thought you might like it. It's a place where we can just be ourselves, without any of the noise." They spent the first few days settling in, finding joy in the simplicity of their new life. Emily took to the garden with enthusiasm, planting flowers and vegetables, her hands reconnecting with the earth in a way that felt both grounding and revitalizing. Michael, too, found peace in the routine, taking long walks along the beach and spending quiet evenings by the fire with Emily at his side. As they began to establish their new life together, the bond between them deepened. The struggles they had faced in the past seemed distant, replaced by a quiet contentment that neither had known before. They talked about their dreams, their hopes for the future, and the family they one day hoped to build. It was a future that felt attainable now, within their grasp, and they both felt a sense of excitement for what was to come. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Michael turned to Emily with a thoughtful expression. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said, his voice soft yet serious. Emily looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" Michael took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring, nothing flashy, but beautiful in its understated design. "Emily," Michael began, his eyes locking onto hers, "I never imagined that I'd find someone like you. Someone who could change my life in the way that you have. You've brought me back to life, in more ways than one. And I can't imagine spending the rest of my life with anyone else but you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Emily's eyes as she looked at the ring, and then back at Michael. The journey they had taken to get to this moment had been long and difficult, but it had brought them to a place of love and trust that she had never thought possible. "Yes," Emily whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you." Michael's face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. They embraced, holding each other tightly as the reality of their future together began to sink in. It was a moment of pure happiness, a culmination of everything they had fought for. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world around them seemed to fade away. There was no past, no future, only the present and the love they shared. Their life at the cottage became a series of small, beautiful moments. They spent their days exploring the coast, working in the garden, and planning their future. The simplicity of their life brought them closer, and the challenges they had faced in the past only served to strengthen their bond. And so, Emily and Michael began their new life together, far from the complexities of the Harper mansion. It was a life filled with love, peace, and the promise of a bright future. As they looked out at the vast, endless ocean, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The months following Michael and Emily's engagement were some of the happiest of their lives. They settled into a rhythm at their seaside cottage, their days filled with the simple joys of building a life together. The peaceful, idyllic setting allowed them to focus on each other and the future they were creating, free from the pressures and expectations that had previously weighed them down. As their wedding day approached, the couple decided to keep their ceremony small and intimate. They wanted a celebration that reflected the simplicity and peace they had found in their new life. The guest list included only their closest friends and family, including William and Victoria, who had come to accept and support their relationship wholeheartedly. On a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by the people they loved, Emily and Michael exchanged vows in the garden of their cottage, with the ocean as their backdrop. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity, with the golden leaves of the season gently swirling in the breeze. As they held hands, promising to love and support each other for the rest of their lives, there was a sense of completeness, as if everything had finally come together. The reception was held in the garden, where guests dined on home-cooked meals and danced under the stars. Laughter and music filled the air, and the warmth of the gathering made the cottage feel more like home than ever. Emily couldn't stop smiling, her heart overflowing with happiness and gratitude. This was the life she had never dared to dream of, and now it was hers. As the evening drew to a close, Michael and Emily stepped away from the celebration to take a walk along the beach. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silvery light on the waves as they lapped gently against the shore. Hand in hand, they walked in comfortable silence, the sound of the ocean their only companion. "It was a perfect day," Emily said softly, leaning into Michael as they walked. "It was," Michael agreed, his voice full of contentment. "I couldn't have asked for more." Emily smiled, feeling the cool sand beneath her feet and the warmth of Michael's hand in hers. "I'm so glad we found each other." "Me too," Michael replied, stopping to look at her. "I can't imagine my life without you, Emily. You've given me everything I didn't even know I needed." They stood there for a moment, the waves gently lapping at their feet, before Michael leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss full of love and promise, sealing the bond that had held them together through all the trials they had faced. As the months passed, life continued to unfold in beautiful and unexpected ways. Emily and Michael embraced the routine of their new life, finding joy in the everyday moments. They spent their mornings tending to their garden, their afternoons exploring the nearby town, and their evenings wrapped in each other's arms by the fire. The peace they found in the simplicity of their life was something they both cherished deeply. It wasn't long before they received the news that would change their lives forever. Emily was pregnant. The discovery filled them both with an overwhelming sense of joy and anticipation. The thought of bringing a child into the world, of creating a family together, felt like the culmination of everything they had worked for. The pregnancy brought them even closer together as they prepared for the baby's arrival. Michael was loving and attentive, always making sure Emily was comfortable and cared for. They spent hours discussing baby names, decorating the nursery, and imagining the future they would share with their child. William and Victoria visited frequently, bringing gifts and advice, their excitement for the new addition to the family evident in every interaction. For William, the news of his grandson was a source of profound happiness. He had always dreamed of having a big family, and now, with Michael and Emily, that dream was becoming a reality. The months of pregnancy passed quickly, filled with preparations and the growing anticipation of the baby's arrival. As Emily's due date approached, the excitement in the cottage was palpable. They had chosen the name Harper, a tribute to the family that had brought them together and a symbol of the new beginning they were creating. On a cold winter's night, as the first snowflakes began to fall outside the house, Emily felt the first signs of labor. Michael, though calm on the outside, was filled with a mix of excitement and nervousness as they prepared to welcome their son into the world. The midwife arrived quickly, and the small house was soon filled with the quiet, focused energy of the impending birth. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.